Hello, this is Kevin Sloan with the University Rover Challenge again, and we're coming to you with another video to help you get ready for the URC 2023 finals, which are coming up in a week from today. We're recording this video on the 24th of May. Of course, we'll be back in Hanksville on the 31st of May, with the Rovers beginning in action on the 1st of June. To help teams get ready, we have a series of videos where we're going through several of the missions and other important facts for URC. Today, we're going to be going through the science mission. And with me to cover all things science on Mars, got two wonderful guests that I'm going to welcome to the studio. So first up, Heather Smith, who is our lead science judge for URC. Heather, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And second, we're going to welcome Jen Blank, one of our other science judges. Jen, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Kevin.
All right. So really quickly, I'm coming to this as, a robotics guy. I've got the engineering background, and the science piece is something that certainly a lot of us robotics and engineering folks are a little less familiar and comfortable with. So Heather, what is the general context of what teams are going to be doing in the field? What are they looking for? What's the meaning of the data? And what are they expected to accomplish?
Great question. So they're expected to be able to analyze a soil sample and determine whether that soil sample has life in it or no life in it, or absence of life. If it does have life in it, the teams are expected to be able to determine if that life is extinct or extant. So extinct would be something that's already dead and that's breaking down. Extant is living organisms, so metabolizing, etc. All of this is to be done on the rover. So they're to collect the sample, ingest it, and do the assays on the rover itself. Then secondly, we're going to have some rock samples out there for them, and they need to distinguish the same there. Is there a lack of life, or is there extinct life, or is there extant life in those samples? So the key.
It's important, I guess. And this is excellent, Heather. And just to add a few little details here. And one is that, actually, as Heather mentioned to me recently offline, on Earth, there's really no environment that doesn't have life, except perhaps molten lava, or some, fumaroles or something, fumaroles. But so we're assuming that when she says life, detect life, living organisms or organisms that are metabolizing, this is essentially above some threshold level, something that's detectable, in other words.
Correct, which that would be anything. Right now, the life detection instruments are 100. They stop at about 100 cells per gram of soil, and that's where they've been at for about a decade. And there's not really been much improvement in that.
Even the spacecraft that are launched off of Earth are not 100% absolutely devoid of microbes.
Correct, and I would consider that if there was a life detection thing on the spacecraft, that the life detection would come back as yes, the spacecraft has life. So it is 100% yes or no. Yeah. So Jen's point is fabulous, in that everywhere on Earth has organisms. So you're thinking, well, we're in the NGRS desert, of course it's going to come back with life. But to be honest with you, we are providing the samples, and I've taken that soil and baked it at 500 degrees centigrade for over 12 hours. So I have not only killed all the life in it, but then I have killed all the organics and taken all the life from the dead bodies out of the soil. So one of the soil samples is in fact no life. Okay, so that one, there's no organics and there's no life in it. If you find organics, there may or may not be life. Okay, but if you find no organics, then there's no life. Okay.
So there's the question of life or no life, or extant, in other words, living, existing life, or past fossil life.
Correct. So if you find life, you have to say, is the life extinct, meaning is it dead? So that could be something like limestone. So some of this takes, is supposed to be known by the science person on the team from doing their background research. Specifically, if they see a limestone or put hydrochloric acid on a rock and it bubbles, that means it's limestone. If you have to get a clean surface before it bubbles, then that means it's dolomite. But in both of those conditions,
some rocks are essentially made from skeletons
in both of those conditions, limestone and dolomite are dead fossils. So that is 100% extinct, or that would be classified as extinct. If you have that same limestone with lichen growing on it, the lichen is physically metabolizing, that would be extant.
So lots of good
Not give you a
discussion.
specimen that has extinct and extant. Sorry to interrupt, Kevin. Go ahead.
Oh, no. It's all incredibly good context, and certainly, anytime you're introducing the science component of this, which is ultimately one of the major responsibilities of what you're trying to accomplish with the rover, there's lots of nuance with it, and answers aren't always perfectly clear cut, which is certainly makes for a much more interesting problem for the teams. So the rovers are going out; they're doing a little bit of sampling and work with the soil. What ultimately are the students expected to do to convey information back to the judges? How does that process work?
Yeah, this is great. So they're going to give us about a 10-minute briefing. It doesn't seem very long. It's not very long. But during that 10-minute briefing, the teams need to say why they chose the assays, which assays they chose, and what results that they expect. So, for example, let's say that they did the no life. They sampled the no life sample. They looked for chlorophyll in it. They didn't find any chlorophyll. So they concluded that that's no life. Okay, let's just say they take the second sample, the extant sample, they looked for chlorophyll, they didn't see any, so they said, okay, well, that's either no life. Okay, either one of those could be no life. But then they did a second assay to say whether it was extant life or no life. So then they would say, well, we saw no life in these, so we think it could be no life. Oh, but we saw carbonic acid in this one, so we think this one could be extinct. And then you go to the third sample, the extant one, and they say, oh, we saw chlorophyll. Obviously, chlorophyll is life because it's a pretty common molecule in Indolus, Hypolus, and obviously plants, but there's not plants on Mars.
Heather,
go ahead.
I guess a couple questions have come up here in my thoughts, and one is we're not going to say whether the samples are going to be all of the same type or different types, or all have life or evidence of present or past life, or all be essentially sterile or near sterile samples.
Okay, we are going to tell them. So we will tell you that there's 3 samples and there's 1 choice each. We will tell them that.
Okay,
so I will tell you that now.
Process of elimination, then they can that will help them aid in their
correct. So if a team guesses correctly by process of elimination, they get points, but not nearly as high if they can say that they came to those conclusions from analytical results.
Right, and this goes to the scientific method, right?
Correct. And then,
before you even do any analyses, it's really important to try to use other tools we have, and one of the most important tools that we have as people are our powers of observation. So, for example, say your chlorophyll instrument or your life detection instrument isn't working, you can still receive partial credit by coming up with a sort of a logical description of what you're seeing in the sample and where you would go from step A to step B to continue down the path toward determination of whether your sample is life or not.
Right. So let's just say that you have a method and you couldn't get any of it to work, but you could explain how your method would have worked and what the results would have been on each of those categories: life, no life, life extant, or no life. You'll get more credit for that than you will be just for guessing. Because for the science one, it's your knowledgeability of the science that matters, not whether or not your instruments work. But you're not going to get the highest score if you don't get any data. If you don't get any instruments.
And one problem we've seen is that, especially with these teams traveling from far away, sometimes they arrive and their instruments don't work. And that's tragic and that's distressing, but there's still a lot you can do. So don't give up. If your instrument doesn't deploy or the reading doesn't record or you can't see it, that's not ideal. But you don't say, "Oh, I give up." You keep going with what you have. And there's so many cases of NASA missions where they've had near catastrophic events happen, and they have just through essentially taking a breath, backing up, and working together as teams, they come up with either workarounds or new ways to apply their instruments and their work.
Yep, and Voyager is an example. They're going to cancel Voyager. They turn off another area to gain some more power from the reserve power, and Voyager is going now. Now, if you have a lander sorry, if you had a rover, everybody's starting out with a rover in theory that moves, okay? If by the time you get to science site, your rover has decided it is not moving anymore, you can barely turn it on, show up with your rover, okay? Can't show up just humans. Put your rover on the X spot, okay? If you can turn it on and all and get pictures and zoom in, and your scientists can look at that picture and analyze it and do a best guess, you will get somewhat decent of a score. If you don't show up at all with your rover, you will get a 0. So the science mission is the only mission that if you're actually having technical difficulties with your rover, you can do fairly decently as long as you know your science. Now, it does mean that if your rover isn't working, we will question you more scientifically to pull out more information from you to be able to give you a higher score, or to give you a 100%.
We want you to succeed, but always think, never give up, never surrender, because this is an opportunity to show us everything you've done and show us, what I guess activities and results that represent all the hard work, because it's so much work to get here, and you're also wonderful to have made it this far. And so just think about, if something doesn't work, or if something breaks, and you have to make a plan B or plan C or plan, etc. Don't give up. Just take a deep breath, work together as a team, and think carefully through what you can say, because sometimes, and I find this even in my professional life, I'll think, oh, I don't know I'd interpret any of this. But if I take a step back and then start slowly describing what I can do or what I have seen, then I realize, oh, I've actually contributed a lot, or I've made a lot of progress. And it may not be the dream example or behavior that I planned on, but you can still do quite a bit, and it's always making progress.
Yeah, those are excellent points, and certainly the resiliency of the team to overcome and stick with the mission. And one of the other things that is probably worth pointing out to teams, there certainly is a lot of concern about the chemicals that teams are able to bring.
Yeah.
We put a new chemical safety plan process in place this year, so teams are working through that. And for a lot of the teams that are traveling, perhaps even internationally, there may be complications with having chemicals confiscated or whatnot. If you find yourself in this situation,
you're back.
You certainly want to stress to the teams not to overreact or stress too much about that. And what we don't want you to do is start making any rash or unsafe decisions that deviate from your chemical safety plan. So when adjusting your chemical safety plan, and if for some reason you didn't have the chemicals available, just as Heather and Jen were mentioning, there's still a lot of analysis and work and discussion that you can have with the judges. So certainly want to prioritize the safety process, and specifically with the chemical safety plan. That really takes priority over everything, and it's ultimately not going to have a dramatic impact on teams.
Yeah, I'll comment on that. If you come to URC and you do not follow your chemical safety plan, you will get close to 0 points. Close to 0. Maybe you'll get 1 or 2 points, but the safety is the number one thing. If you violate your chemical safety plan that's already been approved, close to 0 points. Now, if for some reason you have a chemical safety plan, it's been approved, you're on your way here, somebody takes your chemical, somebody takes your BIRUT reagents, so you can't do the assay. You know what? That's okay. Let us know if they're confiscated. You will get 0 deductions for somebody taking your chemical. As long as you can describe
confiscated.
Confiscated. As long as you can describe how the BIRUT test worked and what your results should be had you had the BIRUT reagent.
Are you
now? That's assuming that you were also
Heather, are you talking about confiscation at customs, for example, coming to the U.S.?
Customs or TSA, number of places that it can be confiscated from departure to arrival.
Okay.
So if you don't happen to have your assay, but you know what the results should have been for each of those, that's fine. And that's also assuming that your sample collection system is working and your other parts are missing. If all that's missing is your actual reagents because somebody confiscated them,
Heather,
that's not going to cost you any points.
Let's talk very briefly about the possibility of actually retrieving a sample in this year's challenge, right? Having a cache sample that the rover team is able to deliver.
So we'll provide you 3 samples, and those are the samples you need to analyze. Your cache can be one of those 3 samples. You do not and should not collect an additional sample just to be cash. The only reason we have the cache on there is so.
Heather, what is a sample cache and what is a cached sample?
A sample cache or a cache sample to me are different things, but we only need one for this competition.
Okay.
Sample cache is something that you collect and you're going to hand to us at the end.
Right.
The main reason we have it is because next year we might actually do a sample collection with a cache, like a real one. This year, we're not considering it a real one. We're considering it a practice one because the teams had a huge break from COVID, and the technical capabilities last year were not good enough for us to change the competition. So I introduced a small cache this year. Doesn't just 1 gram to 10 grams. It doesn't matter if you hand me 1 gram or 7 grams. It's the same amount of points. Same.
Right. In other words, we want a small sample that, in principle, in theory, would be something you could analyze on board the rover, in another competition. But in this case, we don't want a giant scoop full of overwhelming amount of.
And we specifically, actually, the smaller samples would be better because every time a team takes something from the sample, I have to go replenish it between samples, which is fine. That's exactly what the competition for is. We refresh the samples between each of the teams. So
and it's also generally good practice.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do that anyway, especially the no life one.
Most might you need.
Well, the other thing is actually you brought up a good point. We are constantly trying to make the samples look as though they did for the first contestant or the first team between runs. But one thing you mustn't do is you mustn't destroy a sample. You don't roll over it and contaminate it. Don't just break it up. So if that's the one thing that will actually be very detrimental to your overall score, it's to bulldoze the sample.
Yeah, that's an excellent point of advice that teams need to keep in mind. And certainly there are things that can result in penalties, and doing anything to cause unwarranted damage to the actual samples themselves that all teams have to work from. So that certainly is an area where teams can find themselves on the wrong end of a penalty. Let's just quickly look at the flip side of it. So just with the time that I know there's always more science that we want to cram into any given time. You can see the enthusiasm of the judges. What are a couple of pointers for teams of things that they can do to positively enhance their scores? What are some of those tips?
So not doing any of the major things that reduces them, and those are four items. Running in the sample, spilling anything on the course. The third one is intervention. Intervention was a huge deduction for points for folks last year. And the fourth one would be wasting samples, handing the team, the judges, a 10-gram sample when you only need 2 grams. That for this year would be a faux pas. If you don't do any of those, that's great. What you do need to do is have an operating system. So that means that you have a camera, you can guide yourself to the samples, you can collect the samples, your assays work, you get the feedback from your assays, meaning you get the results on the rover back to the science team. The science team correctly interprets the results, and then they give us a presentation. And the presentation is approximately 10 minutes. And we expect to see instruments chosen, sample 1, this analysis, these results. Sample 2.
But most people make a short PowerPoint presentation very quickly.
Everybody has a PowerPoint and everybody has it pre-done. Before they even show up, they just load the results into the PowerPoint, and then we get the PowerPoint.
But just to reiterate, Heather, so the number one, the other one occurrence that can reduce your score really is if having to call an intervention. And this is when essentially the rover is stuck, nothing's operating, you have to have people come in, either try to fix something, team members rather, or reposition the rover, etc. And it's not a critical, I guess that is a critical failure, but it doesn't take you out of the running.
Right. Okay. And then to make the best score is answering our question. So clearly articulate presentation to us. So you're judged almost exclusively on this 10-minute presentation. That's how you gain your points. Okay, you have to have it clear and articulate, and it needs to be in English. Second thing is, most importantly, answering our questions. And if you don't correctly, And if you don't understand our questions, you can ask for clarification. The other thing is not using a conspiracy theory as a reference or doing anything that's considered faux pas in the science community, such as a conspiracy theory for reference, such as no reference, such as not knowing the basics of a question that we ask you, and not knowing your assays. That or whatever you have on board your rover, if you don't know how that operates as a science team, that's not very good for you.
Right. But as Heather mentioned earlier, there will be 3 soil samples and 3 rocks. And even if the soil samples, as she mentioned, will be sort of almost like multiple choice, where you'll have 3 options, and they'll each option will correspond to one of the samples. But the rock types, even if you don't know the rock type right away or can't tell, you will get some credit for using your geologist's eye or your scientist's eye to describe the rock and the features you see in the rock and walk towards an identification. Whether or not that's correct, as long as there's a logical progression and flow, you'll receive partial credit for that.
And the soil samples are worth about 85% of the score to 90%. The rocks are worth maybe 5 to 10% of the score. So your soils are what matters versus your rocks. Yeah. And to be honest with you, we don't have you identify the type of the rock. You just need to say if the rock is life, no life, or extinct or extant life. But you do base those analysis on the type of the rock. So if we put out like a petrified piece of wood, that's obviously a petrified piece of wood. That's the type of rock it is, petrified piece of wood, and that's extinct life. Okay. If we put out a tufa, that's obviously a tufa, and that came from volcanic ash, right? So there's stuff like that you need to know, but you don't have to say it's volcanic ash, but you also can't say the petrified wood is like limestone. Well, because it's not going to be limestone.
Certainly not limestone.
Yeah. So you can't say it incorrectly.
For example, there might be something you see. There might be something you see that has a certain shape and a different chemistry or a different crystallinity because it's been replaced over geologic time. The composition has changed over geologic time. So in general, though, these will be straightforward examples that somebody with a Geology 101 background should be able to identify readily. Or someone with interest in just rocks outdoors. there aren't really any scary rocks that only one person would be able to identify correctly. These are things that we think we might see on a mission.
Yep.
All right. Well, this is certainly good insight, some good pointers for teams. So I guess the last thing, actually, Jen, last year was your first year attending URC out in the field. Heather's been around since the very beginning of URC in 2007. But from the new person's perspective, coming into your second year, what were just a couple of quick observations that stood out to you last year, and what are things that you're excited to see this year?
I guess I loved the team spirits of the individual teams and how in general the teams worked really well together. There was no blaming when something went wrong. It was just how can we work together to fix it. So I love that teamwork. I love some of the creative solutions that people came up with to fix things on the spot, or even some of the analytical assays that teams brought to the table to help them compete. And also, in general, it was just the vibe was so great because there are all these really smart young people who are there to win and also to learn and meet new people with shared interests from all over the world. So that was really exciting to me.
All right, that's great. Well, thank you much. I think we're going to end the video there. So thank you, Heather and Jen, for joining us. Looking forward to seeing you out in the field in just a week. For all the teams, good luck with your final preparations. Don't forget to pack your spare parts. Make sure your chemicals are packed safely. Make sure it's following your chemical safety plan. And safe travels to everybody. And we look forward to seeing you in Hanksville.
Sorry, I'll say one thing. That is, I have a colleague who put some of his chemicals, and this is small chemicals, in his toiletries. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but
correct.
That is not approved, and that would get a team disqualified if they did that.
So don't do that.
All chemical transportation has to follow your chemical safety plan that has been submitted and approved. So I think we'll end it there. Have a great day, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you out in Hanksville.
Great, thank you.